Dr. James Adams is joining us tonight from Georgia. He's a professor at Dalton State College, and he has taught there for 34 years. As he says, about every class that starts with the letter E: ecology, evolution, entomology, ethology, and also, not E, but human anatomy and physiology. He attended the University of Kansas and did his PhD thesis on the defenses of tiger moths, which is relevant to his talk tonight. Since the fall of 2011, James has been the editor of the News of the Lepidopterist Society, and that's a 52 to 56 page quarterly publication of the Lepidopterist Society. Although James is a specialist in Noctuidea, something like that, he also likes other groups of moths. I may mangle this one too, Zygonoidea, in particular, and he has an interest in butterflies as well. His favorite families are the lichenids, the coppers, hair streaks, and blues. So thank you so much for being with us tonight, James. It's going to be a really interesting presentation on the defenses of butterflies and moths.
Thank you for asking me to come. I knew some of the people in this group, but I've gotten to know more of them, of course, by attending some of your meetings, and so it's a lot of fun being here. And 9 p.m. is not too late for a mother, just so you know. So. And you'll have to excuse me, you'll see the professor and me come out sometimes, because undoubtedly I will ask questions as I talk about my images. You should feel free to answer or not as you wish, or simply remind me, hey, James, this is just a presentation. We're not your students. We don't have to answer, and get me to move on. So.
Or you can put a question in the chat too.
And that's fine. And what I was going to say was, besides answering my questions, if you have a question, I am perfectly fine if you literally interrupt me with a question at the time I'm talking about something. I know that at some talks, I've had a question at certain points during the talk, and then I wait till the end, and with my old brain, it just goes away, and I can't remember what question I had. So, but again, Paulette did say you can put it in the chat too, and she can always ask me later. Anyway, I'm going to share my screen. Everybody needs to tell me if everybody can see the screen as well as my cursor. Is that working?
Screen and cursor both.
Everybody else, we good? Okay. All righty. Well, tonight's talk is one that I've put together and is appropriate for just about people of all ages. Now, maybe not 3-year-olds, but it is the kind of thing where it's got enough general interest and enough really scientific interest that hopefully not only will you enjoy the pictures, but you'll learn a lot as well. As Paulette mentioned, my dissertation was on defenses of tiger moths, which is where all my interest in defenses started. We all know that moths and butterflies are at the bottom of the food chain, and certainly they do end up being food for all sorts of things a lot of the time, but they are, as the title says here, not the wimps they appear to be. Now, butterflies and moths, of course, can be found anywhere. Here's an image of wonderful habitat from my area. Here's wonderful tropical habitat, but we know that butterflies and moths can even be found in the Arctic. Depending on where you are, there's going to be defensive mechanisms that some butterflies or moths will exhibit, and they, of course, differ from species to species. Now, being a biologist, we don't talk in absolutes very often, because most systems are such that there's always exceptions to the rules. But here are a set of what are almost absolutes, and they apply to what I'm going to be talking about tonight. I abhor, by the way, slides with lots of verbiage on it, and you'll think not after the first few slides, because I have several. But it is important to put down some summary statements from time to time to make sure everybody's on the same page. The key items you see here are, if something can be eaten, if there are plants in a given area, of course, there are animals. I think you all know that as animals, we depend on plants and would not be here without plants. If there's something with a nutritional value, that's plants or the insects. They, of course, will be eaten by some other creature. And I'll mention what I mean by cheating in a little while. Certainly, I point out that mimics, in a sense, are sort of cheating, as you'll find out later. Sperm are cheap. This is in a literal biological sense. I think most of us are probably aware of the fact that when it comes down to the two sexes, that females are more important than males, because if you lose a male, there's typically always another male available, whereas if you lose a female, you lose not only her, but all of her potential offspring. And then, of course, death. And as you will see, everything I've mentioned here is going to play a role in what we're talking about tonight. Okay. And the point is, as I said earlier, is that butterflies and moths get eaten by a lot of different things. And so here's just a few things that the butterflies and moths have to look out for. And you'll notice the one in the lower left-hand corner already has a lepidopteran in its clutches. All right. So what I'm going to be talking about tonight, and I'm going to kind of run through this quickly, is all here. There's a whole bunch of things that have to do with coloration. And of course, the coloration can be associated or not, as you will find out, with different kinds of chemical protection. There's all sorts of behaviors that butterflies and moths, and for that matter, other insects can exhibit. There can be physical protection like spines and cocoons and that kind of thing. And then one of the things, of course, that insects are famous for is when you do have a female, as I mentioned earlier, who is responsible for not just herself, but all of her offspring, those number of offspring can be tremendous. Many, many lepidopterans can lay several hundred, and as I will point out, there are several that can lay several thousands or even tens of thousands of eggs. And this can just simply overwhelm potential predators. Somebody's going to make it through if you have that many offspring. All right, I'm going to start off talking about coloration. Now, you may have heard the word crypsis before, and this simply means that you're talking about some organism that is camouflaged in some way. And of course, mimicry applies to something mimicking some other organism for, again, usually some kind of protection. I'll point out that, as I say here, the words can be sort of interchangeable in the sense that anything that is camouflaged is in essence mimicking something in the background, although we typically call that crypsis. Anything that is mimicking, even brightly colored things that are mimicking other brightly colored things, in essence, are hiding themselves in this sea of other organisms. So in a sense, they sort of can be used interchangeably, but we all know how they are typically used. So let's start off with this crypsis. Here is a moth that just got done flying here in Georgia. We usually see this moth from the beginning of the year to right about now. And again, you can see how wonderfully, magnificently camouflaged this moth is right here against the lichen in the background. And indeed, green coloration, as you know, blends well into all sorts of backgrounds, be it lichen or be it leaves or be it grass or anything else that is green. A lot of green out there in nature. This was a moth that I encountered, and hopefully you can see this moth here, in a sandy dune habitat here in Georgia. And when I first saw it fly, I sort of wondered, well, why is it that color? It shows up really obviously as it's flying, and then it landed right on the sand. Didn't land on a plant, didn't land on anything, landed on the sand, and you can see just how wonderfully that color blends in with the color of sand that is in this dune system. Now, this is another moth that occurs here in the southeastern United States, although I think there are relatives in the Northwest as well. And it's not the moth, though, that I'm interested in showing you. It is its caterpillar that is right here. There is the head, and there is the tail end of the caterpillar. And you'll notice that there's hardly any shadow here, and that's because if you look carefully, you can see all of these wonderful little frilly fringes that it has on it that lay flat against the bark, and literally not only is it the color of the bark, but it eliminates all the shadows. So it blends in absolutely beautifully with the background. Now, there are other ways of being cryptic, even though you may be, as I sort of said earlier, a little bit more obvious. Although this caterpillar is obvious and this moth is obvious, we all know of individual caterpillars and adult moths that look something like this. And of course, the whole point is, by looking like bird poop, you tend not to get eaten because there's just not too many things that want to eat bird poop. Now, I know some of you may have been to the tropics and noticed that there are skipper butterflies and other butterflies that do come to bird poop, but that's because real bird poop has some nutrients in it. but they sip the nutrients. And if some butterfly came to this, it of course wouldn't eat the caterpillar. It would just leave and be disappointed that there was no soupy nutrients available to it. We of course are very familiar with butterflies and moths that look like leaves. Here are two examples. Here's one that blends in well with the dead leaves in the background. This butterfly is particularly cool because it even has a couple of clear windows in the wings that look like holes eaten through the wings. And then there are some that are just generally kind of not necessarily leaf shaped, but the coloration again would blend in with the background. And these are just tremendous as far as I'm concerned, because that is a two-dimensional surface. It's a flat surface. That's a two-dimensional surface. It's a flat surface. And yet the coloration is such that it looks like a three-dimensional curled dead leaf. Just magnificent crypsis. And I think you would agree. Then, of course, there are things that are more stick-like or blade-like some geometric caterpillars, or even some adult moths that are long and skinny. And of course, these little crambid moths are famous for having lines that line up, or stripes that line up with the grasses that they sit on. And so again, lots and lots of different kind of mimicry. And here, of course, we have two different caterpillars, two different families that are the caterpillars look very similar, and they both evolved to have these tendrils on them that look very much like the viney plants that they feed upon. And of course, we can go with moss and lichens. Again, there are a number of caterpillars. This is an underwing moth caterpillar from here in the eastern United States. And this is one of the Adelpha butterfly caterpillars from down in the neotropics. Again, you can see when it's a mature last instar larva, it's green. As it gets pre-pupal, it turns yellow. And I'm going to revisit this butterfly here in just a second. There is, of course, yet another way of being camouflaged against your background, and that is to be absolutely clear. I can tell you from my own experience of trying to follow this through the undergrowth that it was really, really difficult when I was in Costa Rica to follow this butterfly, because you literally, as you can see right through it. So when it lands on whatever background it lands on, it literally looks like the background. Now, I mentioned that caterpillar just a couple of slides ago. This is its pupa. Very stunning, and you would think, well, something that's silver like that would just stand out like a sore thumb. And of course, when you use flash photography, it does stand out like a sore thumb. However, silver in nature is simply going to reflect everything around it back at the predator. And so the predator will lose that in the background as well. So, oh, what did you just see, anybody? Did anybody just see a hole in a leaf by any chance? Is that what that looked like? Because this is a moth, and what made me think this was a hole in the leaf mimic was I was scanning my slides at one point and wondered from the little bitty thumbnail on my screen why I had a picture of a hole in a leaf. And clearly, to me at least, that's what this looks like. Very dark green, and even the edges with the legs sticking out along the sides and the back edges of the wing, it makes it look like the whole area around what might be the hole is dried up and dead. And so that moth was spectacular when I realized that that might be a hole in the leaf mimic. And of course, there are some other things that look like eaten edges of leaves. These notodontid caterpillars often feed along the edges of the leaves and will sit in this characteristic position. And like I said, it looks like mottled green and sort of dried out edge of leaf. Now, we've been talking about camouflage, and here is a species of moth, and again, the moth adults look camouflaged, and this is what the caterpillars look like for the eastern race in Mexico. Green, many, many caterpillars, as you know, are green and blend in with the background. What was really interesting was I had the chance to rear the western race, however, and same looking adults, but the caterpillar was strikingly different. And so it made me think that this one may actually be, here's a word that some of you know, but some of you may not, and it's aposematic. Now, what do I mean when I say aposematism? Well, aposematism is a phenomenon where the insect can either acquire chemicals from the environment, like in the larval food plants, or actually synthesize them de novo, meaning they make them themselves from other chemicals they get from the environment. And the idea is this, that once you have these nasty chemicals in your body, you advertise it with bright color. And this one is probably familiar to a number of you. This is the pipevine swallowtail, and we'll revisit the pipevine later as well. And here is the southwestern version of the caterpillar. And you'll notice that both stand out quite strikingly with their bright colors. And I mentioned defenses of tiger moths, and you can see why tiger moths were like the first moths that ever drew me to the dark side, because tiger moths are just absolutely strikingly beautiful. And of course, the reason why they're absolutely strikingly beautiful is because practically every tiger moth you see that's brightly colored like this has some kind of chemical protection. And so it's advertising that, although again, we'll come back to that later as well. And as I said, some species, the message just looks super clear. Like, here, look at this bright red. I taste bad. Now, I will point out also that the wings are clear, and we'll come back to that as well. And we've already talked about being clear in terms of being camouflaged. Although I will say that perhaps the message here is not quite as clear as the message on this organism. So, all right. We are talking about bright coloration advertising bad taste. Bright coloration in other insects like stripes on wasps and that kind of thing, of course, can advertise a bad experience where if you grab them, you may get stung. As such, it should surprise no one that a number of insects, including leps, have evolved to look like other insects that are bad tasting. And here is an example. This is the pipevine swallowtail again. This insect is the Diana fritillary. I am fortunate enough to live in the area of the country where this thing actually occurs. And the reason why I said this is the Diana fritillary is that this, of course, is the male and this is the female. Okay, and we'll come back to this discussion later about differences between males and females. But the concept I want to get across right now is simply this concept that's down in the left-hand corner, and that is of Batesian mimics. Now, what's a Batesian mimic? A Batesian mimic is one where the individual that's doing the mimicking actually is perfectly edible to predators. So this one's bad tasting, this one mimics that. And that, of course, is the classic idea of being a mimic. You get away with being protected because you're colored something like a model, and that is the name we use for those that are the ones with the protection. They're the model. You get away with this coloration and you get away from being eaten because the predators have been trained that this is bad tasting. Now, you'll notice I said something, and that is that the predators are trained. Predators do not necessarily come out of the womb or out of the egg knowing that this bright colored insect tastes bad. They have to be trained. And so they have to eat a few. Now, you see mimicry over and over again between butterflies and moths. It can be butterflies and butterflies. It can be moths and moths. It can be a whole set of butterflies and moths. And again, you'll notice in this case, it is more the female than it is the male. Again, we'll come back to that. That looks like this a mimic, although in all fairness, this one probably tastes just as bad, if not worse, than this butterfly. So it may be that this butterfly mimics this moth instead of the other way around. And indeed, this moth is also, besides being a night flyer, is a day flyer as well. And so this butterfly could actually be protected by mimicking. And I mentioned the wasps and bees earlier. These are all moths, and these are 3 different families that have moths that look like various sundry stinging insects. Again, the idea is if you've ever had an experience with a stinging insect, you're not going to attack any of these insects either. Now, sometimes you look at these and you go, I wonder if that's a wasp mimic or not. And they may be. And there are some species that are much better wasp mimics, as you just saw, than others. And certainly they have these clear wings, and some even make a buzzing noise as they fly. But these may not be a wasp mimic, and certainly they occur in the part of the country, part of this country, into Florida and South Georgia, where there are no wasps that look like this. So it is quite possible that these actually are simply aposematic, but this crambid moth, which is perfectly edible to predators, is undoubtedly mimicking these. Now, there is another kind of mimic that I want to bring up, and that is Mullerian mimics. Now, what are Mullerian mimics? Well, I mentioned that you have to train the predators for a good reason. And the reason you have to train, the reason why that matters is because individuals of these insects have to die to train the predators. So bad taste may be good for the species, but not necessarily protect the individual. So would it not make sense if there were multiples of you who all taste bad to look like one another? Then it would take fewer of any individual species to train your predators. And of course, most of you have seen these butterflies, if not in the wild in the tropics, then in butterfly houses, because they're pretty easy to rear. These are long-wing heliconius butterflies. And what you see here are two different species. What you see here are two different species, two different species, two different species, two different species. And the idea is, again, predator eats one of these and it will never eat either of these. Predator eats one of these and will never again eat either of these. And as I said, it can end up being a ridiculous mix of different moths and butterflies in different families that are all involved in a giant mimicry complex. We have no fewer than 7 different families of butterflies and moths in this picture. You will notice that a few of them have skull and crossbones on top of them. Well, all that means is that they have been tested in the laboratory with predators to see if they actually have an adverse response to them. I can guarantee you that some of these other arctines, like that one and that one, are very likely bad tasting as well. So there's more of these in this complex that are probably Mullerian mimics than indicated by the skull and crossbones. But the point is that this is a whole mix of both Mullerian and Batesian mimics, all in one place, all flying together. Now, the first example, though, of mimicry I showed you was a male and female Diana, where only the female mimicked the pipevine swallowtail. Now, why does that make sense? Well, you'll notice that I wrote a little comment up here, SAC, S-A-C. Hopefully some of you remember that SAC stands for sperm are cheap. And by the way, just a side story, that usually comes up in every one of the biology classes I teach. And I've had students I haven't seen in 20 years who come back to me, and the one thing they always seem to remember is sperm are cheap. And they'll say that even before they say, hey, Dr. Adams, how you doing? Just thought I might relate that to you because I always find that fun. All right. My point, however, in this slide is here are some mimics of models. Again, here are 2 long-wing species. There's the female and male of this species. There's the female and male of this species. So what we have here, like with the Diana fritillary, is a female only that mimics the model. The males are basically left to fend for themselves. And why did I say this is important to this? It's because the idea is it's the females that are protected. The males, again, have to find other ways of surviving and reproducing other than mimicking a model. And again, since you have to train the predators, if both male and female look like the model, that would be twice as many individuals that were good tasting out there. And so the idea here would be if both sexes look like the model, the predators would more likely get one that tastes fine the first time or second time or third time, and it would take longer to train them. And so the idea is that the females mimic the models because we all know females are more important. Okay. Now, into behaviors. We talked about coloration. We talked about how the coloration can be mimicry, crypsis, all sorts of different things. But that's not all there is to the coloration. It still may be a good idea to remain camouflaged if you have to train the predators, at least until the predators find you. And this tiger moth normally sits with these wings down over, the forewings down over the hind wings. So instead of bright red, you have a disruptive black and white pattern. But you touch it, and this is what it does. And the idea here is that you show off the bad taste once you've been discovered. This Saturniid moth, Same thing. You touch it, it does this, rolls over, shows off all this pink and this bright orange and black abdomen. So the idea is stay hidden until you're discovered and then show off your bright color. Now, I keep mentioning, though, we have to train the predators. Wouldn't it be nice if the bad taste was not only good for the species, but you could survive an attack as an individual? Well, there are ways of doing that. And one of the ways of doing that is to do what's called reflexively bleed. That's what we in tiger moth communities call what you see here. If you've ever picked up a tiger moth, you may have seen the tiger moths ooze a little bit of fluid. You may have even smelled the bad smell. And the idea here is if a predator catches this in its mouth, it does this immediately, gets a mouthful of bad tasting fluid, and spits this moth out to fly another day. So in this case, the bad taste works for even the individual. All right. Now, like I said, we've talked about coloration, talked a little bit about behaviors. I'm going to talk about some special coloration, some of which you are familiar with. And the first one I know you're familiar with, and that is what we call false head coloration in hair streaks. This particular species actually has been caught a couple times in very South Texas. So I guess we can call it part of the US fauna. But here's the head with the eyes, and you'll notice a little orange spot. I like this one in particular, though, because there's a very obvious black spot, looks like an eye, much, much bigger orange patch, and then, of course, two tails that stick off. And the discussion is that that really looks like a false head. And besides that, in this species, you'll notice that all the lines are pointing there as well, as if this butterfly is trying to say, bite me here. And of course, it works. Here's one that has the ends of the tails bitten off. Now, you may wonder why I'm showing you this moth. Well, we're going to flip it upside down, and then I'm going to trim off the wings. And let me back that up. And you might think, oh, really? That supposed owl is half an inch across. Well, let me remind you that a predator's brain may see an owl at half an inch across as being an owl sitting in a tree 20 yards away. And the brain may not necessarily process that it's right there in front of it and still be scared because it knows to be scared of that image, so to speak. Please be aware when I say knows to be scared, I'm anthropomorphizing. It's not really that. It's just been selected to recognize that face as the face of a predator. And of course, we saw some eye spots in the previous one. Here is a moth that is familiar to anybody who lives in the eastern United States. And again, when it sits, it's yellow, blends in with many backgrounds. But if it gets touched, this is what it does. And of course, a predator who touches one sees two eyes staring back at it and tends to back away. And I've actually seen some potential predators back away from moths or butterflies with eye spots on their wings. And you probably have seen this one before. This is one of the biggest moths in the world. And of course, the reason why I have chopped off the end of the wing up here in the corner is because that, to many people, and you would assume to predators as well, looks like a snakehead. Now you may say, but if they're looking at the entire moth, they could tell it's not a snakehead. Well, yeah, that's fine. But suppose the moth is sitting under a leaf in the woods and the only part that's sticking out is that. Okay. Speaking of snakes, it's not just adult moths that can have snake patterns on them. This is a sphinx moth caterpillar from the tropics. And I think you would all agree that that looks something like a snakehead. This is a owl butterfly pupa from the tropics. And even that looks something like a snakehead. So mimicry and coloration, as I've already pointed out, is not, in terms of protection, is not restricted to the adults either. And there's one with a spider pattern. And this is, again, not the only moth that has a spider-like pattern. There are several different moths that have patterns on the wings, and there's flies that have patterns on the wings that have been shown to confuse jumping spiders and prevent them from eating them. Now, I realize that this is a talk about defenses against predation. Well, those defenses should, of course, hold up against parasitoids as well, things that get inside and eat things from the outside, or eat the caterpillars or butterflies from the inside. Obviously, this one, its protective mechanisms didn't work. This is a catalpa worm, and it is somewhat chemically protected, But as we all know, there's no protection that works against every single species. There's always some predator that can get around whatever protective devices you have. So here's one that failed in terms of being protected. It's got a lot of parasitoid cocoons on it, and it's doomed. It's not going to survive this. And all those cocoons are going to hatch out into tiny little parasitoid wasps that will lay more eggs on more caterpillars. But the reason I show you this picture is so I can show you this picture. Here we have 3 different moths in 3 different at least subfamilies. They're caterpillars, I should say. And you'll notice what they have on their in their hair tufts on their body. Here's one with white hair tufts along the back. Here's one with whitish to yellowish hair tufts on its back. Here's one with whitish hair tufts on its back. The suggestion here, although it's a hard one to test, is that these are mimicking parasitoid cocoons, because it has been done with at least a few species where if a caterpillar has parasitoid cocoons, other parasitoid wasps will not lay their eggs in it because they know, again, anthropomorphizing, that their larvae will not survive in a caterpillar that's already parasitized. Okay.
James,
Physical protection.
before you move on to the next topic, there's a question about testing of some of these mimicry strategies. David, do you want to weigh in on that?
Okay, I'm not looking at my chat right now. Do you want to read it, or do I? Well, here, maybe I can get to my chat. Hold on.
So has the snakehead wingtip of the Atlas moth been tested?
I see that. I find the similarity to a snakehead dubious. David, that is a very reasonable thing to be dubious about. There are many moths that are related to the Atlas moth where it has been suggested that that is a snakehead. Now, as I said, it's difficult to test a number of these, and I agree that to you and to me, it may be dubious. I would also, however, point out that to a predator, maybe their distinguishing capabilities are not as good as yours. Now, the point, however, in terms of difficult of testing, and I agree, David, because I don't think it has been tested, is that you have to know what the natural predators would be, and you'd have to find a way of putting them in a position to make a choice. Where you like black out the snake head markings on the ends of the wings versus leave them intact and have the actual predators make a choice. So that's the way you'd have to set it up, but that's a very difficult thing to do because, like I said, you have to know who the natural predators are in nature. So it is perfectly valid to question any of these things I'm talking about. Some of them have been tested. Some of them have not been tested directly. Okay. So I appreciate that question immensely because it does point out that as we should in science, we should be skeptical about all sorts of things until they're tested. So, so you can take that for what you want. If you don't think it looks like a snake and don't think it would ever deter a predator, fine. I'm just putting it out there as one of those possible mechanisms that has been suggested. Okay, one thing we do know that works are hairs and spines, especially when associated with little glands at the base of the hairs that can inject irritating or toxic chemicals. Tiger moths are well known for being very hairy. Here's one species, there's a second instar larva, there's a fifth instar larva. And if you do, many of these larvae can be handled just fine, but if you do press on the hairs, you do tend to get this histamine reaction. There's a lot of histamines in this that can be injected under the skin, and you often get a little reddish rash. There, of course, are caterpillars that are much better protected than that. This one here, I actually stepped on one when I was rearing it one time. That was not a pleasant experience. These spines are very stiff, and it feels like something is burning you when you experience it. This one comes with another story, personal story. I was raising some related caterpillars to this one trip in Mexico. I was carrying them along with me, and I had permits to get adults of the moths back into the States, and so I was trying madly to get them through to adults. And I was changing them one day, and the one I was rearing didn't have nearly as obvious spines in it. And So I picked up the caterpillars, moved them around, and then I scratched the inside of my nose. And when I did that, I put spines from the caterpillar into my nose, and I spent like the next hour digging on the inside of my nose, much to the chagrin of my parents and people around me. And it was not my finest moment, let's put it that way. So in other words, those spines really work. So, and of course, as I just showed you with that previous slide, the caterpillars can be aposomatic and spiny at the same time and show it off. There are even caterpillars in one family who are famous for having this layer of just weird, sticky, gooey stuff on their surface. And this will come off and just fill the mouth. Not me, I've never tried one personally. In case you're wondering, I have tried some tiger moths myself, and they are, at least for me, not that I'm a normal predator, are quite bad tasting for the most part. But this goo just comes off in their mouth, and as saliva adds to it, it swells. It's just apparently not a pleasant experience. You'll see this with mice that try to eat them or frogs that try to eat them. I think those are the two organisms that they've been tried with. And then, of course, the famous structure of a cocoon. That is, of course, the whole point of a cocoon is to provide this protective layer around you while you metamorphose. Metamorphosize? Which one is it? As you change state, okay? Anyway, so here's just a nice loosely woven cocoon around a larva of this species. There are even some species, and this is a nice little connection to the previous talk we had at the very end. We were mentioning that there are some lycaenid larvae that have glands that secrete chemicals that attract ants, okay? And we had some agreement/disagreement about whether we should call this honeydew. I don't care what we call it. What it does is it does attract ants, and the ants like it, and therefore the ants are around the larvae. Now, how is this a protective mechanism? Because anything that comes down and interferes with the larvae gets attacked by the ants. They really, truly do tend the larvae. Okay. I'm nearing the end of the talk here. This, of course, is a bat. I am very interested in bats. Why? Because, of course, the bats are one of the absolute main predators on the organisms I study. In case you're wondering, this is the screen of a bathroom in Costa Rica, and I had put up a black light right down over the door. The people who were with me at this biological station weren't particularly happy with me for putting it right over the door to walk through this cloud of insects, and there were a lot of giant water bugs that could bite the heck out of your toes landing on the ground. They weren't particularly happy with me. But there was a bat going back and forth in front of the screen, eating, of course, the moths that I was attracting to my lights. And these were my attempts to get a picture. That was my first attempt. You see, I failed miserably. I thought that was a pretty good attempt, actually, considering it was flying back and forth. But the second one I took, initially when I saw the slide, I thought, it's not a great one. But then I looked in closer, and it comes with a moth in the picture as well. And this moth, this picture, although I blew this up and it's grainy at this magnification, is still an image that's good enough that I was even able to identify the genus, okay? But the coolest thing you'll notice is that this moth is upside down. This moth is upside down. Do moths fly upside down? No. What's going on? Well, many, many moths have ears, and they can hear ultrasonic pulses. And the idea is that they have an ear on both sides of the body, and if the bat's coming at them from one side, the sound will be louder in one ear than the other. Now, one really cool thing about the ears is that the nerve cells that run from the ears go directly to the wing muscles. So it doesn't have to go to the brain and back. It literally goes directly to the wing muscles. And the idea is whatever side of the body the sound is louder on will stimulate those muscles more rapidly. And of course, that means that and I don't know if you can see my little picture, but that means that as they're flapping along, they'll be flapping at the same rate. But then suddenly there's a bat coming from, let's say, this side, and suddenly it'll be like, okay? So I don't know if you can see my picture just then or not, but the idea is one flaps faster than the other, and when that happens, they do a roll, okay? They won't stay upright. They do a roll automatically. This is the automatic escape mechanism. And tiger moths that I mentioned earlier take it one step further. because associated with their thorax and some wing muscles is a sound producing organ called a timbal. And they may have many, many ridges across it so that the muscles pull and it goes brrr, only it does it in ultrasound. And the idea there is that at night, bright color is not going to protect you from bats. But what can protect you from bats is, hey, I hear you, bat. Here's my sound I'm sending to you. The bat goes, what does that sound mean? It grabs the tiger moth, gets a mouthful of reflexive bleeding, and goes, that was terrible. And the next time it hears the sound, it will avoid catching that moth. So this is in other words, it's an aposematic sound as opposed to an aposematic color. All right, I mentioned safety in numbers. I showed you this picture on the left earlier, sort of one that would blend in with the leaves if it was in a brownish, tannish leaf habitat. On the right here, you see the eggs that come out of a relative from Mexico. And I think you can see that, and I felt kind of bad because I had captured this and it started laying eggs. Now, they do scatter their eggs out in the habitat. And so after this picture, I did go and scatter the eggs out in the habitat, hoping that some of the caterpillars at least would make it. But they are unusual in that the reason they produce this many eggs is because of the very way in which they reproduce, which is they literally fly through the habitat and just scatter the eggs as they fly. And the idea is, again, with that many, surely some will make it. And of course, we've all seen puddle clubs. And we all also know that if you startle this one and this one and this one, and they start flying, then suddenly you've got a whole cloud of individual butterflies flying. And you can't focus on any single one. And I would argue that a predator faced with that has the same problem. That being in a bunch like this, even if you're brightly colored as you're sitting, it may seem like a counterintuitive strategy because it puts a whole bunch of you in danger, but it's the same idea as a school of fish, if you understand what I'm saying. Hopefully you do. And that is the next to last slide of my talk. I want to mention that you'll notice that many, many images as I went through had copyrights from many, many other people who I have asked to provide me with slides. And of course, people have provided me with conversation that I've added to this. But I thought I would add one more slide for this group in particular, because I wanted to show defensive mechanisms in a couple of people that you know. And that is those two people. As you'll notice, these two individuals are defending themselves. And as you'll notice, I thank Jeff Pippin for this one. And I hope that both Bob and John get a big kick out of seeing themselves. And thank you very much for listening. Hopefully you learned something new and were at least somewhat entertained.
Oh, thank you so much, James. I learned so much in that talk. I've never heard of aposematic sounds. That just blew my mind. So, John, you had some things you wanted to say. Do you want to weigh in at this point?
Man, I got so many things to say that I'm going to have to hopefully.
Well, say a couple things at least. You can do that.
Okay, first of all, thank you very much. That was outstanding, Professor. And I got a whole lot of things to say. One is that a predator is really different from a naturalist observer. You made that point, but we really need to know and understand that if you're like a 3-inch bird and you see something that even moderately resembles a snake,
exactly.
You're out. Right. Okay. So now the other thing that's really, really important, and you covered it, I just want to break it down. Deception equals lies. Mother Nature lies. Lying is a way of life that if you don't practice it, you won't be long in this world, right?
Well, John, remember my slide of absolutes? I forgot to use the word cheating again, but that in essence is what you're talking about. And
yes, it is.
By
yes,
looking at something else, you cheat Mother Nature, you cheat the predators.
Right. Well, so now the other thing I wanted to, and this is the question, but I have kind of an answer in my own experience, but there's false aposematism right? So
Mhm.
if you know that, like being really bright and shiny and all of that gets you, that's like bad advertisement for the predator, then you could conceivably be bright and shiny and get the cover, even though you're perfectly, edible, right? I mean, that's a concept that I haven't personally proven because I haven't eaten enough of these things to know.
Yeah. Well, that was what I was talking about when I was talking about Batesian versus Mullerian mimicry.
Right.
Batesian is the idea that you can get away with being brightly colored and not bad tasting. But the point
Oh.
is this, and there are plenty of examples that have been tested where it's very clear that this thing tastes fine, and if you feed a predator in the lab this one thing, it will eat it just fine. But you feed it something that looks like it that tastes bad, and they won't approach it anymore. So that has been done in a number of cases, certainly not all cases, okay, but certainly done in a number of cases.
Well, what I was really getting at is that you can be bright and shiny, not look like anything at all, but bright and shiny will get you by.
Yeah. The one thing, though, that you, of course, need to be aware of is, and I kept saying this over and over again, is the predators have to be trained, which
Right.
means you can't have an overwhelming number of good tasting, brightly colored things.
No, but if you have just a small number of really
Yep.
bright and shiny things, predators say, look, last time I did that, I threw
Yep.
up. I'm not having it. Right.
Yep.
Okay. I want to move on. So invertebrates versus invertebrate predators. Is there a relationship between, the potential predator ratios between those two groups?
I'm not sure I understand your question.
Okay, so like a praying mantis, versus a vertebrate and a bird. Is a praying mantis or a spider, able to overcome? They're not impressed by mimicry. Are they?
If you're asking, are some better at picking out possible prey against backgrounds than others, the answer is absolutely yes.
Well, I was thinking more in terms of a recent paper that was published in a journal. You probably read it. It was it was some kind of a day flying moth that was known to be toxic, and it made noises and it smelled nasty. And they tried to feed it to a saw puget, and the saw puget actually went after it and did really quickly rejected it, and with vigor, as such that it would wipe its chelicerae in the sand. You saw that paper.
I
right?
did see that one. Yes, I do remember that.
So, and I recently had someone, document that a praying mantis ate. I can't remember what it was. It was some toxic creature from South America, and the praying mantis ate it with vigor and then promptly died. Right.
Yeah.
So, yeah, that's not going to be much of a lesson if the predator dies. Right.
No.
Okay. So you know about those things.
Yes, I do. Well, this
okay.
this is one of the other things I said it once. I didn't really emphasize it too much, and that is that no defense is going to be 100% effective against everything.
No, that's
There are
right.
going to be predators that and you're going to have variability even within single species of predators, where some
Exactly.
predators may eat them and some predators may not. And we also know that the chemical protection can vary within the species of insect. We all know that monarchs, for instance, eat different kinds of asclepiads, different kinds of milkweeds, and depending on which milkweed they eat, they may be more or less toxic, because you'll get to see pictures from time to time of something munching away very happily on a monarch. So nothing works 100% of the time, and so you're going to have individual species which are going to eat this thing that other things don't. And so, but then you have ones that, like you said, obviously
I got lots more. You better wait.
Yeah, can't. Well, as you said, same things true with coral snakes. If a coral snake actually bites you, you haven't learned anything because you're dead.
Yeah, right. Yeah. Okay, so you're familiar that one of the Hamaluca down in your area, when they're captured, they curl their abdomens around and they have bright red or orange tips of the abdomen tufts of
That's
scales.
mine. That's mine. Yep.
Okay, so are they doing the same thing that you demonstrated with that?
Yeah.
Okay.
If you smell those, but anybody want to see a picture? I can give you a picture real quick.
Okay.
Hold on. Gotta find it. Won't take me long.
James, do you know Paul Severance?
I do not know Paul Severance.
Oh, he's at the University of Georgia, and he was telling me all this stuff. It was like pretty amazing, actually.
Okay.
Got that picture?
Yeah, it's coming.
Is it the pink one?
It's this one. You'll notice
yeah.
Yeah.
Okay, but that one's dead, right?
Well, that I will admit that that one was vouchered because that's only the second time I took it in December. So yes, I collected that one. But what you said is true. They will curl this abdomen, those bright red legs and this bright red tuft on the end of the abdomen. They'll curl it, and that is exactly what something we'll see first. Is that?
Now, do they smell too?
Yes, they do. That was the other thing I meant to say just a moment ago, but if you didn't hear it. So
So if
All
you're
right.
brightly colored and smell bad, I know how I'm going to dress from now on.
Well,
John,
I've been
you
around
already
you,
do.
Don, and I haven't noticed a bad smell most of the time.
I was gonna say you already do.
Yeah, hey. Okay, so James, were you at the 2010 Leavenworth Lepsoc meeting?
I was.
Okay, you remember the young people from Canada that demonstrated a larva that was making a sound that was a
Yep.
warning sound?
Yep.
That you know, where the bird would come along, the larva would make a sound, the bird would fall off the perch.
Mm-hmm.
Okay, do flying moths ever sound back?
Yes, I mentioned those tiger moths. They do that when they're flying.
Okay,
Automatic.
so
It's an
they're
automatic response. Like I said, the ear nerve cells are directly attached to the muscles that work the timbal organs.
okay, so that's what it was. Okay.
Yep.
So noise making is actually a really profound part of this too for night flying creatures, right?
Absolutely. Because
All
like
right.
I said, bright color doesn't work at night.
No, that's exactly right. Okay, so there was a one crypsis that you overlooked. And it's
Oh,
called
I'm sure.
no. This is a joke, dude.
Okay.
It's called
Well, I'm still sure you're correct because there's no way I could have covered everything.
it's
So
taxonomic crypsis, right? Where things look so much alike that we can't tell them all apart.
Right,
And
right.
it's not a matter of predation, except if you consider an
Right.
observer a predator. The checker spots out west, right? You're familiar with the fact that all euphydrias are essentially toxic, right?
Yeah.
Okay. And out west, that we have a number of them that are, bright orange, and we have a number of them that are really dark, black and yellow, and they're all aposematic. I mean, that it's clear they fly slow and everything else. But what's interesting is there's a convergence not only of other toxic melatoids, checker spots that feed on plants that secure iridoid glycosides for them, but there's a number of them that are astraceous feeders that also converge on that pattern, right? And so that's just normal. I mean, if we're looking at it as you did as the professor, it's just normal, mimicry. But for us, it's confused the heck out of us.
Yeah.
We didn't know.
Of course, that's the point.
That is, but it's not the point because we're not. Well, we still collect them, so it really didn't work for them, did it?
Yeah. Well, suffice it to say, you didn't eat them either, though. So
no.
I mean, if you were eating them, it might have worked, but obviously you didn't catch them for that. So,
hey man, hey, thanks an awful lot. That was just fantastic. I really appreciate that. Thanks
I was gonna say maybe, yeah. It's funny that you bring that up, the taxonomic crypsis, because we were talking about that just today in my evolution class. I mentioned that even if we can't tell them apart, that's not what matters. What matters is that they can tell themselves apart. It's the only thing that matters.
Well, it all depends on what you think matters. I think it matters when I'm trying to sort things out. Excuse me.
I understand, but they don't care about that.
No, they don't.
So I want to pull the thread on a comment that Jonathan made. Regina, could you unmute and ask your question? Because I think
I know we're letting Jonathan kind of dominate the questions.
I'm done. Mike
out. I knew he would, and that's fine. I enjoy interacting with John, but yeah, go Regina.
Oh, well, it's kind of complex. I think I got it typed out, but you know how some insects, like the monarchs you were mentioning, they specifically host on a plant and they sequester the poisons in the plant to protect themselves. Are there predators that do the same thing to toxic prey?
You mean, are there predators that maybe remove parts of the body that they don't eat and eat the other parts that are good? Is that what you're asking?
No.
True.
Are there predators that are specifically looking for this particular prey species that's toxic?
Saying. Yeah, that's a really good question. Because I know that I want to say that there are other insects that do that. I feel like I've read some literature, but it's been a while, where you have things that purposely prey on toxic prey to get that into their bodies. I can certainly say this, although it's not an insect, that sea slugs are probably the most amazing creatures in terms of doing something like this, because one of their favorite foods is jellyfish. And they are able to take the entire mechanism, not just the toxins, but the entire stinging mechanism, somehow absorb it through their gut lining, move it to the surface of their own skin, and use it for their own protection.
Wow.
Crazy.
That's magic.
Crazy. Way beyond anything that we were just talking. So
Yeah.
it's not an insect example, but that's a great example of what you're talking.
Still, yeah.
Paulette, could I say a word to that?
Absolutely.
No, Bob.
And Allison, if you could unmute too after and comment, that would be helpful.
I'll be
Go
short.
ahead, Bob.
Two little things. First of all, on that question about whether any of the predators go further on with the seeking out the toxin, it was hoped that that might be the case in Mexico with the monarchs when Lincoln Brower and his field team were working on the species that James began to refer to, that select parts of the monarch to eat. Those are the orioles. They strip out the fat bodies that don't have the toxin and leave the rest behind. They dissect them. And the other group of birds that consume a great many of the overwintering monarchs are the grosbeaks related to our black-headed grosbeaks. Now, both those grosbeaks and those orioles that are the big monarch predators happen to be orange and black. And it was a very interesting hypothesis at first, whether or not they might be doing exactly what Paulette asked about, or Regina asked about. Regina asked about. It turns out Lincoln looked into that and they were not, but it was a lovely just so possibility. As far as educating the predator, of course, the very classic image of that was from Lincoln Brower and Jane Van Zandt Brower in the cover story of the May 1969 Scientific American, where the famous photograph of the barfing blue jay appears.
Barfing blue jay.
That's when it was absolutely proven that this really does happen, that the predator must be educated. And it was quipped later on that Lincoln Brower, no matter whatever he did to become so famous, and after the Nobel Prize and everything else, he'd be chiefly remembered for that barfing blue jay.
Indeed.
I just have one other quick thing, and that's that these survival tactics can sometimes be used for more than one purpose. So with the eye spots, we all know the owl sequence. And by the way, that was a fabulous owl cutout you did, James. That was the most remarkable owl I've ever seen.
Yeah.
But we've seen the pictures since childhood of the big calico owl butterflies upside down. Now, when you have big eye spots like that, they almost certainly do serve as surrogate or mimic eye spots to frighten the potential predators. The very same animals, though, can have some small eye spots arrayed near the margin of the wings, and there the function changes. And a good body of research suggests that with Cercionus, the wood nymphs, that you get both, that you get some frightening aspects with the big eye spots closer to the body, and yet the array of smaller ocelli or eye spots along the edge of the wing are chiefly targets. Like a false head. So, and it can be in the same species. And I suspect that your giant Cercionus pegula, large wood nymphs where you live, may do the one more, and our smaller Cercionus pegula here may do the other more. I'll finish by saying that as a boy, the very first grant I ever got from the Colorado-Wyoming Academy of Sciences was to look into various aspects of wood nymph natural history and biology back in the 1960s in Colorado. I was looking at their variation and coming to some of the same conclusions that I never published, didn't have the data for, that ultimately Tom Hamill came to with some of his research on them, that there was a lot of variation within species, not so many different species. But the one thing I did come up with, never published it, I wasn't, as a kid, didn't know how to do real science and publish it at that point, but I did come up with a very interesting figure. And that was that in my sample size, both collected and gotten released, hundreds and hundreds of individuals in several populations, more than 25% of the large wood nymphs carried bird bill impressions or bird bill tears at the eye spots. 25%. Now that's much higher than one would require for adaptive load to help to push those eye spots evolutionarily toward better and better defenses.
Mhm.
Thank you, James, for a wonderful talk. If you have any comments on that, please do. It was really an observation.
I would just
Inspired by you.
Yeah, I would just agree totally with what you just said, that it is fun when you start looking at eye spots that they have different purposes depending on their size. And of course, that was the point of showing that small eye spot on the hair streak first, was that it's a target as opposed to something scary. So but
Exactly.
yeah, absolutely. And I'm sure almost everybody here has probably seen some butterfly at some point with a bird beak mark on it. So
Yeah.
at some point. Somebody else was going to ask a question. Was it Allison? Was it? Who was?
She had a comment. Allison, do you want to weigh in?
Please
Sure.
do.
Well, and Bob, I'm glad you said that about the Orioles and grosbeaks, because I've been wondering that for a while. Like,
Yeah.
oh, those are orange and black too.
That would have been cool.
It would have been
Yeah.
awesome.
So out here we have these rough skinned newts that are brown with a bright orange abdomen, and they have a neurotoxin in their skin. But garter snakes have adapted just, I guess, the shape of, well, I saw a talk on this, but it's
Mhm.
basically the way they don't absorb the neurotoxin the way other things do. So they aren't poisoned, so they are able to eat them. But I don't know if they incorporate toxins or not. They do have red and yellow stripes, some of them, but I don't know if that means anything.
John, did you have another comment you wanted to make?
Anybody else?
Well, those Tarica granulosus, those newts, are highly toxic. A well-known story here that turns out to have been true, not just suburban or rural myth, that a couple of loggers were in a bar not very far from here, and one dared another one to drop a newt into his beer and drink it, and he did, and he died. Did I speak too fast? The logger died from the newt. So they
Yeah.
are highly toxic for sure.
Yeah.
Whether it made the logger toxic, I don't know.
Just have a summary note before I go, and I just want to make sure everyone knows. I didn't mean to make that rhyme, but I want to get out on time. So the deal is that one creature we all know, eats a lot of toxic compounds from a whole bunch of different families. I mean, Apiaceae, Brassicaceae, Solanaceae, just it's incredible. There's one creature really eats a lot of these things. Do you know what that one creature is? We all looking at them, right? Human beings eat more toxic compounds than any other creature that I know. Okay, now I have evolved a reason for why that is so. Oh dear, I'm gonna rhyme again. We are toxic to extraterrestrials. So you know the joke, right? That was the joke.
Yes, I got that. Yeah. I saw Paulette laughing too, so I think Paulette got it.
Well, the two of us anyway.
Well, in all fairness, I would imagine that comes from the fact that our diet is so broad, and we probably just for the time that humans have been on the planet, have just tried all sorts of things. And if we didn't die from them, we probably continued eating them. So,
well, not only did we die, we found out they tasted good. I mean,
again, though, I will point out that it varies from individual to individual. Some things that you think taste good probably taste just awful to me.
Yes,
well, I love
broccoli tastes
jalapeno.
like poison to me. But it is one of the theories of how large herbivores like cattle and such can eat things that other things can't eat, is they only eat a little bit of everything, and so they don't get overloaded with the toxins.
In fact, cattle are known to graze on the monarchs at the foot of the monarch trees in Mexico.
Mm-hmm.
But, I'd like to see an EKG in those cows. But then the monarchs vary a great deal, as James said, in their spectrum of palatability.
Yeah.
There's a very good book on the John, good points you made. There's a very good book by Gary Nabhan, ethnobotanist, on the coevolution of mammals and chilies, hot chilies. And the book is called Why Some Like It Hot, but I recommend it. And you look into why birds are not affected by the toxins in chilies, and why mammals are, and how things happen that way evolutionarily. Yeah, recommend it.
Well, I'm glad that my talk on defenses in butterflies and moths has turned into a talk about sea slugs and jellyfish and cattle and birds and newts, and it's a lot of fun. It's a lot of fun.
James, it had to go that way, didn't it?
You couldn't.
You had to.
Yeah. But of course, we could continue. We could continue this conversation all night long, as you know. So.
Yeah.
Hey, Cheryl, you've been watching moths. Can you comment on what you've been seeing?
Yeah, I just the last couple of nights, the number of larvae caterpillars that have been crawling onto the door where the light is posted or put in place is creepy. I mean, it's like they're migrating to Mecca. It's huge numbers, like 50 all over the sidewalk to get to where the light is placed. And is that common?
Larvae?
Yeah, there's a bazillion cutworm larvae is what they look like, but there are a lot of them. I mean, I have a picture and there's like, 20 of them.
Have you seen any on the plants, or have these been dropping from above? What are we talking about?
Well,
have you seen any on long web lines or anything like that? So
no. So I have a moth light that's just on the housing on our building out there, and have a moth trap set up with it. And last night in particular, we have grass, and then there's like pavers before the building. And between the grass, it's just, they're coming out of our grass, and they're going right towards the moth light, and they're crossing the pavers, and they're crawling up the wall, and I'm finding some inside the building. They can get underneath the doorway, and I'm like, I mean.
And they're smooth skinned, yes, not hairy, correct? Smooth skinned.
Yeah, they look like cutworm larvae. I can send you a picture if you want, but
Cheryl, I'll take a shot. You're in the Northwestern United States, and I don't know the moth fauna there nearly as well as I do the fauna where I am. But I can certainly take a shot at it. And if you really want to know species, I probably know someone who could at least identify it. I probably can't identify it myself, but I could at least narrow it down and send it to the appropriate person.
So do you know that behavior, James, or?
That's actually not terribly unusual. And it depends on the every species, as we know, we're getting into a different part of biology of leps, but every species, as you know, will go through fluctuations in numbers. And so there was one year where here in Northwest Georgia, just about this time of year, now in my case, it was geometrids, but there was just a banner year for the winter geometrids. And in the spring, there were so many caterpillars out in the forest that you could walk out in the forest and it literally sounded like it was raining, because of all the frass that was dropping on the leaves. And so it was just incredible how many. So I'm sure what your experience is experiencing is a large jump in population numbers that happen with normal fluctuations in whatever the species is you're looking at. And of course, it could be one of the introduced things we have too, because there are some introduced things we have that feed on lawn plants and grass plants.
Nuba,
they
overwinters, don't they?
Yeah, and that's what I was just thinking when she said that they're smooth and that they're out this time of year, and there's a bunch of them. I was thinking about Noctua pranuba is what I was thinking. So it's quite possible.
I guess it just seems a little surprising. You think of larvae as wanting to just eat and hide, and so to be attracted to light seems a little counterintuitive.
It does, but I've seen many things at light that I would have never expected to see at light in my lifetime. And I can't always explain to you why they're there, but it's known that there are several species of caterpillars that are actually attracted to light. Now, if you're talking about caterpillars versus adults, there's a lot fewer caterpillar species than adult species that are attracted to light, but there's still some that are. And we don't know exactly, we don't know exactly why that is necessarily.
Moth collectors go to lights a lot.
We do.
I
I
gotta
go,
add,
folks. James, thank you very, very much. I gotta split. Thank you.
Yeah, lovely to see you, Bob, as always.
Thank you all.
I got to add to Cheryl's observations because I first learned about this from her when she was looking for Parnassus clodius larvae, and they feed on Dicentra, which is used to be Fumariaceae, but it's now Papavariaceae. It's toxic as heck, right? And she found one of these cutworm larvae feeding on that, and you have to be specialized to feed on something that poisonous, right? So I couldn't find.
Not
Really?
necessarily, because there are a number of moths, a lot more than butterflies. There are a lot of species of moths whose caterpillar has what are called MFOs, or multifunction oxidases, in their digestive system, which actually detoxify a broad array of different chemicals. And so there are some generalists that can feed on a wide variety of different, what you would consider toxic plants, and have no effects.
Okay, let me write that down. MF.
MFO, multifunction oxidases.
All right, cool.
So do you know
Professor.
any moths that feed on that plant?
No. Again, no Parnassus in Georgia, no high elevation plants in Georgia. Our highest point is 4,800 feet, and we don't have any tundra here. So
We're only at 22 here, so.
yeah. Well, not that I don't like the tundra, and I've been to the tundra a number of times in Colorado. I've never been to the Arctic tundra. I've been to the alpine tundra, but I've never spent time down in the plant base crawling around looking for a lot of moth larvae. So
I have, no.
yeah, and that's great. And if I lived where I had access and had more time to go there more frequently, I would do that. But
Well, where she's at is totally amazing, James, because it's steppe grassland, not mid-montane. Yeah, and this little Dicentra gets out into these dry country, and this animal is able to exploit it. She did a couple of papers. I'm trying to get her to do some more, and I think she might. It's an amazing story, actually.
Yeah, I was thinking the same thing, Cheryl. It sounds like you've got a couple of things, observational things that are interesting. It might be worth writing them up.
Oh, I wish writing were my favorite thing to do.
What's that?
I said, I wish I was an author like you.
I'd help you. I'd help you.
yeah, you'll have to excuse me. I forgot that there are Parnassus populations below tundra, because I've collected some Parnassus in sagebrush in Colorado in 8,000.
Right.
So yeah, I forgot about that. So anyway.
So I have a question about
no sagebrush in Georgia either.
sagebrush, right?
Okay, can I ask one more question?
Absolutely.
About hairs on moths? Like some recent ones that I've seen are like furry, like what Glyphesia severe I had the other night, and it's
very hairy.
Oh my gosh! What's the purpose?
As a matter of fact, you just reminded me of one more thing that should be in my talk, and that is the scales themselves on either butterflies or moths. But the more hairy scales there are, predator grabs them, and the scales simply come off. It's a slippery mechanism for them to escape predators, and that's really one more mechanism, and it's been shown that actually works. So that's something that's been tested, not for every species, no, but certainly tested on a number of different species where the hairy scales just come right off, and the predator gets a mouthful of fluff.
So I did a quick Google search, and it said that hairs are also known to mess up with bats' radar or sonar or whatever.
And certainly that makes sense as well, in the sense that if you have this big array of hairy scales, it's going to dampen what kind of reflection you get from it, because obviously any radar, any echolocation you have is going to come back off of a solid flat object better than anything else. So if you're coming off of a blob of fluff, it's not going to come back as clear.
Yeah, cool.
And of course, one more thing that the hairy fluff is for, of course, it can be thermal regulation as
Yeah.
well. But that's a different story.
Yep. Thanks.
Absolutely.
I was really intrigued by the tiger moths and their reflexive bleeding, I think
Bleeding,
they called it. It seems so nasty. Is there, what is a predator for something that reflexively bleeds, or do they just do it sometimes and so it's
Again, it would be mostly bats, but not all bats, because again, the idea would be, I mentioned the sound they make, but the idea is first time bat ever encounters a tiger moth, echolocation, they get a sound back, they grab the moth, because the tiger moth may not get out of the way well enough, grabs the moth, gets a mouthful of fluid, spits the moth out, moth lives. And so directed at bats, but it can be directed at daytime predators too, because of course tiger moths are just resting during the day. The bird can walk up on one, grab it, okay, get a mouthful of fluid, and so anyway.
well,
It
what
could be
is a
directed at-
successful predator for a tiger moth then?
There are some birds, there are some bats that do not mind it as much. As I was saying, there's no predator, no predator avoidance device that works on 100% of your predators. Just doesn't. But that reflexive bleeding works pretty well on most of them. Let's put it that way.
You're kind of the habanero of the moth world.
Yes,
right?
exactly.
So Allison, you have some experience with bats?
Yeah, so one of the sensitive species of bats in the Pacific Northwest is the Townsend's big-eared bats. And they're very hard for humans to pick up on a bat detector. The reason is that their adaptation, because they're a moth-eating bat, to try to catch moths is to have a quieter sonar. I'm not sure how they do it, but it's hard to detect as a human and harder to detect for the moths.
Absolutely. Yeah, I mean, it's never ending when you start talking about the variation of defenses and variation of mechanisms to overcome defenses. It's never ending in terms of the variety of things that different species do.
Yeah, I think the most interesting class I took was on evolutionary biology, and that was the whole class, was the different defenses going back and forth, or I think our professor called it the arms race.
Yep, arms race, coevolution.
Okay, any other questions or comments? Okay, well, thank you so much, James. This has been so interesting. I really,
Yeah, really good.
a huge amount and things I never even thought of. So, wow, it was really a terrific talk. So very glad you
I'm glad you
recorded.
enjoyed it.
Okay, well, thank you so much for being with us, and we'll look forward to having you again in the future.
As you know, I am perfectly willing to do that sort of thing. So
sounds terrific. Okay, everybody, next month we'll have Julie Combs, and I think Regina, you're going to join in on that too, maybe?
Yes, she's going to be talking about the species of greatest conservation need, and she wants us to collect more data for her on iNaturalist. So I've got a project set up in iNaturalist that I'm going to show people.
Okay, that sounds great. Well, that will be our May meeting, and our last meeting for this series. We'll pick up again in the autumn. So thank you so much again, James. Really, really appreciate your presentation. We'll look forward to seeing you again to present soon.
absolutely.
Okay, thanks.
Thank you, everybody.
Thanks.
Yes.
Have a good evening.